This video will explore the history of Sega's early console systems and their vital role in the gaming console wars.
この先しばらく眠れない。セガ新作ソフト情報。隣のゲームはもうつまらない。
Before the iconic Genesis and Dreamcast that many gamers fondly remember, Sega's journey into home console gaming began with a series of lesser-known but historically significant systems. These pioneering machines not only established Sega as a major player in the video game industry, but laid the groundwork for the console wars that would define gaming throughout the 1990s. To understand where Sega's consoles came from, we need to rewind to the early 1980s. The video game industry was in a state of flux. Arcades, which had been booming, were starting to see a decline in revenue. Sega Enterprises, then a subsidiary of Gulf and Western Industries, was among the top 5 arcade game manufacturers in the United States, with company revenues reaching an impressive $214 million. However, the arcade business slump that began in 1982 dealt a serious blow to the company, leading Gulf and Western to sell its North American arcade manufacturing organization and arcade game licensing rights to Bally Manufacturing. Despite this setback, Gulf and Western retained Sega's North American R&D operation and its Japanese subsidiary, Sega Enterprises. Hayao Nakayama, the president of Sega, saw an opportunity. With the arcade business looking grim, he wanted to use Sega's hardware expertise to jump into the emerging Japanese home console market. Initially, Sega's development efforts focused on the SC3000, a computer with a built-in keyboard. However, when intelligence revealed that Nintendo was planning to release a games-only console, Sega pivoted to develop the SG-1000 alongside the SC-3000. The SG in the console's name stood for Sega Game, though it would sometimes be informally referred to as the Mark I in later years. To keep costs manageable while ensuring product longevity, Sega opted to build the platform using popular off-the-shelf components. This strategy would influence the technical specifications of the system, which included an 8-bit Zilog Z80 CPU running at 3.58 MHz, a Texas Instruments TMS-9918A video display processor capable of displaying up to 15 colors, and a Texas Instruments SN76489AN sound chip providing 4-channel mono sound. The system included 8 kilobits of main RAM and 128 kilobits of video RAM, with power supplied through a 9-volt DC connector linked to an AC adapter. On July 15, 1983, Sega launched the SG-1000 in Japan, priced at 15,000 yen, approximately $150 at the time. In a remarkable coincidence that would shape gaming history, this was the exact same day that Nintendo released its Famicom in Japan. The SG-1000 was released simultaneously with the SC-3000 computer and the upgraded SC-3000H, which featured a better keyboard. The original SG-1000 featured a distinctive aesthetic with a large aluminum nameplate. Some early models had nameplates with black trim resembling the German flag, though most featured blue trim. A red pause button and a hardwired joystick that emerged from the left side of the console. The controller itself had a small joystick and 2 buttons positioned on either side, a design that would prove less than ideal ergonomically. A second controller could be connected via a DB9 port on the right side. At the rear of the unit were the RF output, channel select, power input, power switch, and a 24-pin expansion port that would later be used for the SK1100 keyboard peripheral. The SG-1000 launched with several strong games that showcased the system's capabilities. Among them was Monaco GP, a racing game that featured innovative elements like jumping cars, driving in darkness where other vehicles were only visible in your headlight cone, and sections of icy road. Congo Bongo, Sega's isometric answer to Donkey Kong, offered colorful tropical landscapes that contrasted sharply with Nintendo's more industrial aesthetic. Starjacker was an impressive scrolling shooter that allowed players to control multiple ships simultaneously, creating a unique risk-reward dynamic as ships were destroyed. These launch titles demonstrated Sega's arcade expertise transitioning to the home market. While Sega themselves only released the SG-1000 in Japan, rebranded versions made their way to several other markets worldwide. Despite its limited international presence, an unauthorized clone system called the Telegames Personal Arcade was produced and sold in the United States and Taiwan, capable of playing both SG-1000 and ColecoVision games. The SG-1000's launch proved more successful than Sega had anticipated. Two factors contributed to this initial success. The SG-1000 had a steadier stream of game releases, 21 SG-1000 games by the end of 1983, compared to only 9 Famicom games, and a recall of Famicom units was necessary due to a faulty circuit. As a result, the SG-1000 sold 160,000 units in 1983, far exceeding Sega's projection of 50,000 units. According to Hideki Sato, who headed Sega's consumer hardware development, this unexpected success increased the company's interest in developing video game consoles. One significant game that emerged early in the SG-1000's life cycle was Girl's Garden, developed by Yuji Naka, who would later go on to create Sonic the Hedgehog. In this charming title, players controlled a character named Papri, who had to collect flowers for a boy named Mint while avoiding bears and environmental hazards. Naka and his colleague created the game as rookie training to test the limits of the SG-1000, but management unexpectedly decided to release it commercially. This kind of experimentation with the hardware would become a hallmark of Sega's approach to game development. Shortly after the SG-1000's launch, significant changes occurred within Sega's corporate structure. Following the death of Gulf and Western founder Charles Bluedorn, the company began divesting itself of non-core businesses. This created an opportunity for Nakayama and former Sega CEO David Rosen to arrange a management buyout of the Japanese subsidiary in 1984, with financial backing from CSK Corporation, a prominent Japanese software company. Nakayama was subsequently installed as CEO of the newly independent Sega Enterprises. With this fresh start, Sega released an updated console, the SG-1002, on July 31, 1984, maintaining the 15,000 yen price point. This refined version, sometimes called the Mark II, replaced the hardwired joystick with 2 detachable joypads that could be stored on either side of the console. The controllers featured a D-pad with optional screw-in joystick nubs, a design that resembled Nintendo's Game & Watch controls, but was just different enough to avoid copyright infringement. The expansion port was also moved to a more convenient front location. The Mark II's build quality was improved compared to its predecessor. The main board was securely screwed down on each side of the cartridge port, and the port itself was reinforced with rivets, addressing the durability issues of the original model. The system went through 3 different board revisions during its production cycle, though these differences weren't apparent without disassembly. Early Mark II units retained identical hardware to the original console, including the VDP and sound chip. Later models saw both the VDP and PSG chips replaced with a custom ISIC, designed by Yamaha, the Sega 3155-066. This custom chip notably had unused RGB and sync outputs, making these units particularly suitable for RGB output modification. Despite the potential for enhanced visual output, the color palette produced by this custom chip was slightly less accurate compared to the original. Around the time of the Mark II's release, Tsukuda Original launched an updated version of their officially licensed clone system, the Othello Multivision. This revision featured a slight blue-gray tint to the case and blue keys, replacing the red keys of the original. The built-in joystick was replaced with a D-pad, and like the Mark II, it added a second controller port for the first player and included the expansion port, making it compatible with the SK1100 keyboard. Hideki Sato disliked the original cartridges, comparing them to small black tombstones when inserted in the console. One of his proudest achievements during the Mark I era was replacing them with the cheerier pocket-sized Sega MyCards, which required the card catcher accessory to use on the original Mark I, but could be played directly on the Mark II through its built-in card slot. Notable games for the Mark II included Champion Boxing, which was designed by Yuji Ishii, programmed by Yu Suzuki, and featured artwork by Rieko Kodama, a collaboration of 3 individuals who would go on to become legendary figures in gaming. Orgus was an early horizontal shoot-'em-up where players could transform between a mecha and a ship, each with different handling characteristics, an innovative gameplay mechanic for its time. By 1984, however, the Famicom's success was beginning to eclipse both Sega's systems. Nintendo's hardware allowed for 4-color sprites, while the Mark I sprites could only be a single color, creating a significant visual disadvantage. Nintendo had used a custom chip to enable this capability, giving their graphics more visual impact and appeal. Hayao Nakayama later recounted how this difference was particularly significant. The number of colors that can be produced visually had a huge impact on the consumer. This difference is reflected in the number of units sold, and it sure did. Additionally, Nintendo actively courted third-party developers to expand their game library, while Sega was more reluctant to collaborate with companies they were competing against in the arcade space. The Mark II also faced increasing competition from other emerging consoles from companies like Tomy and Bandai. These combined market pressures would ultimately lead Sega to develop their next system in an attempt to regain competitive advantage in the rapidly evolving home console market. In October 1985, they released the Sega Mark III, which represented a significant technological leap forward, while maintaining backward compatibility with Mark I software. The Mark III maintained a similar form factor to the Mark II, but offered substantial internal upgrades designed to surpass Nintendo's hardware capabilities. The Mark III featured the same cartridge slot, card slot, and 2 DE9 controller ports at the front of the unit, and an 8-pin AV port for higher quality output than its predecessors. Externally, the Mark III continued the white casing design of its predecessors, but with refined aesthetics that would later influence the design of the international Sega Master System. Under the hood, the Mark III offered major improvements over the Mark I. While keeping the Zilog Z80A CPU running at 3.58 MHz, the system featured an enhanced video display processor that allowed for twice as many on-screen colors, 32 simultaneously from a palette of 64, and sprites, up to 64 on screen, and smoother scrolling capabilities. The system's memory was also expanded to include 8 kilobytes of main RAM and 16 kilobytes of video RAM. These specifications put it ahead of the Famicom in several technical aspects. The Mark III's controller was upgraded, featuring a rounded square D-pad rather than the circular pad. Some versions retained the removable thumbstick feature, and like their predecessors, the controllers could be docked on either side of the console when not in use. The Mark III's launch titles included Hang On and Teddy Boy Blues, both released on the budget-conscious Sega My Card format. Hang On, a conversion of Sega's popular motorcycle racing arcade game, showcased the system's improved graphics capabilities with fast, smooth scrolling and colorful visuals. The game featured realistic motorcycle controls where players leaned into turns, creating an immersive racing experience that stood out from other home racing games of the era. Teddy Boy Blues, meanwhile, was a unique platform shooter where players controlled a character collecting monsters in a maze-like environment, featuring catchy music and addictive gameplay. It took approximately 8 months before cartridge production resumed for the Mark III, with Phantasy Zone becoming the first game released in this format. Developed by Yuji Ishii, who had previously worked on Champion Boxing for the Mark I, Phantasy Zone was a colorful, horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up that introduced the mascot character, Opa Opa. The game featured vibrant, pastel-colored visuals that took full advantage of the Mark III's expanded color palette and smooth scrolling capabilities. Players controlled Opa Opa through whimsical environments, destroying enemy bases and facing off against surreal bosses while managing their in-game currency to purchase weapon upgrades. The game's distinctive, cute-'em-up style and challenging gameplay made it one of the system's defining titles. Another significant Mark III release was Alex Kidd in Miracle World, which would become the system's de facto mascot game. Designed by Kotaro Hayashida, who had previously worked on several Mark I titles, including Pitfall 2, the game was Sega's answer to Nintendo's Super Mario Bros. Players controlled Alex Kidd, a martial arts expert with oversized fists, through a variety of side-scrolling stages that included platforming, swimming, vehicle sections, and even rock-paper-scissors battles against bosses. The game showcased the Mark III's technical capabilities with diverse environments, multiple gameplay styles, and detailed character animations. While it was released too late to turn the tide against Nintendo in Japan, Alex Kidd in Miracle World would later be built into many international Master System units, introducing millions of players worldwide to Sega's hardware. Phantasy Star, released in 1987, represented perhaps the most ambitious title for the Mark III. This role-playing game featured a science fiction setting, a female protagonist, Alice, and 3D first-person dungeon exploration, all relatively novel concepts for the genre at the time. The game pushed the system's technical limits with its large world, animated battle scenes, and detailed character portraits. It was also one of the most expensive games to produce, shipping on a specialized 4-megabit cartridge with battery backup for saved games, making it significantly larger than typical games of the era. Phantasy Star set a high watermark for console RPGs and became one of the system's most critically acclaimed titles, spawning a franchise that would continue through subsequent Sega consoles. While the base Mark III had improved sound capabilities over the Mark I, Sega also released the FM Sound Unit, an add-on that attached to the expansion port and added 9 additional mono channels powered by a Yamaha FM sound chip. This hardware enhancement significantly improved the audio quality of compatible games, giving them richer, more complex soundtracks that rivaled arcade experiences. Games like Fantasy Zone 2 and Phantasy Star particularly benefited from the FM enhancement, with alternate soundtracks that added considerable atmosphere to the gameplay experience. The Mark III also supported the NDP 200 paddle controller, which was required for certain games like Galactic Protector and Megumi Rescue. Unfortunately, this controller never saw release outside of Japan, making these titles Japanese exclusives by default. Similarly, Sega released the Telecon Pack in Japan, allowing the Mark III to connect to a compatible television wirelessly, though reports suggest the results were mixed at best. In the early days of its release, the Mark III was marketed as an upgrade to both the Mark I and SC3000, with accessories such as the Sega keyboard, 4-color plotter printer, and data recorder SR1000 even mentioned on the console's box as parts of a complete system. However, few, if any, Mark III games made use of these peripherals. Over 1 million units of the Mark III were sold in Japan during its first year, marking an improvement over the Mark I/SC3000's commercial performance. However, even with its superior technical specifications, Mark III sales couldn't match the tremendous success of the Famicom. By 1989, the Sega Mark III had sold over 1.7 million units in Japan, a respectable figure but far behind Nintendo's dominant position. The Mark III would eventually be redesigned as the Sega Master System for international release. Interestingly, this redesigned console was later released in Japan in 1987, featuring the same internals but with some significant enhancements. The FM sound unit was built in, a 3D glasses port was added, and a rapid fire unit was integrated into the system. Like Nintendo with their international NES redesign, Sega recognized that different markets required different approaches. The International Master System featured a sleeker, more futuristic design than the Mark III, with a black and red color scheme that helped differentiate it from competing products. This strategic redesign would set the pattern for Sega's future international releases, establishing a distinct brand identity that would reach its zenith with the Genesis a few years later. While Sega published nearly all Mark III games internally, there were 2 notable exceptions, Argos no Jujiken and Solomon no Kagi, both published by Salio. Official Sega support for the Mark III continued until February 1989, concluding with the release of Bomber Raid, a vertical scrolling shooter. The SG-1000 console series, including the Mark III, sold around 2 million units in Japan, with the original Mark I model accounting for 400,000 of those units. The SC3000 home computer variant sold 120,000 units in Japan during 1983 alone. Despite these respectable numbers, they paled in comparison to Nintendo's Famicom, which had sold approximately 19 million units in Japan by 1989. For modern collectors, early Sega hardware has become increasingly sought after, with complete systems in their original packaging commanding premium prices. The original SG-1000 with its distinctive aluminum nameplate is particularly coveted, especially the rare Germany model variants featuring black trim instead of blue trim on the nameplate. These represent some of the first consoles Sega ever manufactured and can fetch upwards of $500 to $700 in good condition. The Othello Multivision FG-1000 and FG-2000 systems are among the rarest officially licensed Sega-related hardware from this era. Their unique built-in keyboard for playing Othello in relative obscurity in the marketplace make them highly desirable for serious collectors, with working examples rarely appearing at auction and commanding prices that can exceed $1,000 when they do. For the Mark III, a complete system with the original box FM sound unit and the Telecon pack represents the holy grail of early Sega collecting. The NDP 200 paddle controller, which never saw release outside of Japan, is another valuable peripheral, as it was required for certain Japanese exclusive games like Galactic Protector and Megumi Rescue. These games themselves have become collector's items precisely because they can't be properly played without this specialized controller. In terms of games, Loretta no Shuzu Sherlock Holmes stands as one of the most technically ambitious and rarest Mark IV titles. Released in February 1987, it was the final cartridge release for the system, and at 128 kilobytes was 4 times larger than a standard SG-1000 game. Despite coming in Mark III-styled packaging, it was fully compatible with the original Mark I hardware. Due to its late release when most gamers had already moved on to newer systems, relatively few copies were produced, making complete examples highly sought after by collectors. The Castle, released in 1986, is notable for its cartridge that included an additional 8 kilobytes of RAM built in, effectively adding 8 times the amount of regular memory that came with the console. The gold cartridge version of Phantasy Star for the Mark III is considered one of the most desirable games in the entire Sega 8-bit library. As one of the earliest RPGs to feature battery backup for saved games and a female protagonist, it has historical significance beyond its rarity. Complete examples with box, manual, and the fold-out map can sell for $300 to $500 to collectors. An interesting footnote in Sega's early console history is the Mark IV, a semi-official designation that appeared in Taiwan and a few other markets. This system, most likely a modified Sega Master System II, continued the Mark numbering convention. This pattern even extended to the Mega Drive, which was sometimes referenced as the Mark V in these markets, creating a continuous lineage connecting all of Sega's early hardware. For modern preservationists and retro gaming enthusiasts, one of the most fascinating aspects of these early systems is how they demonstrate Sega's willingness to experiment with hardware enhancements. From the FM sound unit to expanded RAM and cartridges, these innovations foreshadowed Sega's later approach with add-ons like the 32X and Sega CD. This spirit of experimentation, which began with these humble 8-bit machines, would become a defining characteristic of Sega's hardware philosophy throughout its time as a console manufacturer. Although these early systems never achieved dominance in their home market, they established important foundations for gaming hardware design and Sega's future successes. The Mark III's international adaptation as the Master System found particular success in Europe, Brazil, and other markets where Nintendo's presence was less established. This international foothold provided Sega with the foundation to later challenge Nintendo more effectively with the Mega Drive Genesis, establishing the console wars that would define gaming throughout the 1990s and ultimately shape the industry as we know it today. Thanks for joining me on this trip through the history of these early Sega consoles. If there is any interesting gaming phenomena you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss more videos like this one. See you next time.